strung together in the last 2 months, I would say. CERN, as the Large Hadron Collider, concluded their experiments for 2015 back on the 13th of December. And that was all scheduled. There's nothing wrong with the machine. They will be picking up and performing more experiments later on this year. But there was a video that was produced. The individual was claiming that through remote viewing, there had been observations of nuclear explosions, fires, and meltdowns of the detectors of the Large Hadron Collider. Completely bogus. I came out the same day and debunked the entire thing on a short video that I put out, and also through some other channels. The point is, it appears that there's a pattern of disinformation that is being put out since CERN concluded their experiments. Now, the incident that I just cited, this was broadcast prior to December 13th, and the claim is completely false. And the reason for this claim, and I'll cite a couple of others, is to track who is reading the story, who's watching the videos, how they're responding to those, pro and con to the information, and whether the people that are responding negatively to CERN in general, in other words, wanting the experiment to be shut down, wanting the machine to be destroyed, in fact, those people are being tracked. Those people are being paid attention to. It's a very dangerous, slippery slope for anyone to say, gee, I wish they'd blow the machine up, or I'm glad the machine blew up, or I'm happy that people were hurt or even killed. That's a very dangerous place to be. And as the three of us have said, and I say on a lot of interviews, we wish no ill will towards anyone. We pray for the salvation of the souls of the people working at CERN and for their physical well-being.
Didn't you say that they're tracking it with a quantum computer?
They are. The issue here is that the adiabatic quantum computer has been live since the first model, the 128. There have been the 512, the 1024, and now the 2048 model that came out in February of 2015. A lot of people say it's only, a 1024 model or whatever, but it is in fact a 2048. The adiabatic quantum computer is linked to CERN. It is what is now, in its own language of cryptology, able to function independent of any oversight throughout the world with its own form of communication, its own form of code. And it is able to track everyone on the planet at this point. It has the equivalent processing power of 7 billion human brains. That's a figure that's put out by the manufacturer themselves. That's not something I made up.
So when we hear them about metadata, giant stores of metadata, they're actually talking about this AI stuff just being stuffed into data banks somewhere.
That's correct. What I mean by a psychological operation, more specifically, is this is modeling of human behavior. The adiabatic quantum computer, one of its initial goals when the first model was built was to create models of what would happen, since the butterfly effect, what would happen to the environment, to people, to the economies of the world if an incident took place, let's say in California. How would that affect Great Britain or Afghanistan? In other words, modeling of human behavior, modeling of the environment was one of the initial reasons for building the adiabatic quantum computer. When these stories are floated into the public consciousness, such as this disinformation campaign about explosions at CERN, this is for the purpose of creating the algorithms, the models of how people respond to this information.
Are you listening?
And then essentially putting them on a list. So we talk about no-fly lists, red list, blue list, terrorists list, all of these things. People are being placed into categories. Profiles, if you will, virtual profiles exist for everyone now. The other psychological operation or incidents that have taken place, just yesterday, a viewer of mine sent me a link to an article. I will not name the source because I don't want that person to receive any more traffic to their blog posting than is appropriate. But it's a well-known disinformation source. And the story was that Vladimir Putin was sending 100,000 troops to, quote, the Western Front, to Geneva, to destroy the LHC, because he, and this is the claim of the story, Putin understood that at CERN, they had discovered the secrets that the Nazis had discovered regarding the opening of an interdimensional portal for communication
What is this
and for
ray?
exchange of entities, if you will. This is a complete fabrication. There are certain elements of truth, which is classic in a disinformation campaign. But the premise that the Russian government, that Putin would send troops to Geneva is completely preposterous. It's as loony as the story of nuclear meltdowns taking place at CERN. If we get beyond the ridiculousness of the story, of the concept of the story, and look at why would this be put out in the first place, the purpose is for tracking the reaction of the public to the story. You are going to see more of this type of disinformation being published while CERN is temporarily shut down until they get ready for their next experiments. The purpose of that is moving towards disclosure, the disclosure of aliens existing. Now, disclosure, in my way of thinking, is a grand deception. The way that they're going to present disclosure is in the form of physical UFOs that are, appearing in the skies. We know that that is holographic. We know that that is Project Bluebeam, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just trying to make a very short point here, and that is that expect more disinformation to come out specific to CERN and even more outrageous claims. I thought the whole Putin story was outrageous, but we're going to see even bigger stories coming in now, bigger claims that are falsehoods. There is a ramping up of the stirring within the mainstream public, a focus upon CERN. There is a raising of the awareness of CERN that is purposefully being driven for their own purposes. They want people to know about CERN in a different way other than
Yeah, it
the
just
God
happens
particle.
like a flash.
They want this discussion of interdimensional portals to be freely and openly talked about in the mainstream public, everyday water cooler office environment discussions because it fits into the grand deception of disclosure. Even Hillary Clinton is talking about that once she's elected president, she's going to get into revealing all about Area 51. She wants to get to the bottom of it, she says.
So with Hillary going back to a family reunion at Area 51, basically we're dealing with, I think, a continuation of Jade Helm 15, the modeling of the human terrain. And you're absolutely right, this behavioral modeling and these movies coming out, like The Fifth Wave coming out and things like that, all this apocalyptic buildup. Portals and apocalyptic buildup, then these fake stories with fake CERN swirls. And
completely fake video of the spirals over the apartment buildings in Geneva, Switzerland. Completely false. Another psyops.
Coming from a strategic planning model to keep the opposition or your enemy guessing one way or the other so they can't put their feet down firmly is one way to defeat your opposition. And it's very much Sun Tzu art of war type of techniques. Disinformation, people don't know what to believe. Their mind is a double-minded mind, going one way and the other way. So they're caught in that paralysis. Which way do I go? It's strategic, and it's being done by the governments and the alphabet agencies to watch us, to see how we respond.
Well, even Google is coming out more and more and more talking about the fact that they have the adiabatic quantum computer. Years ago, they purchased a couple of the 512s. They bought one, and then I think a year later, they bought another 512. But the issue here is that they're talking about artificial intelligence in the open. They're talking about the billions of dollars that leading corporations are pouring into artificial intelligence. Now, the three of us have been talking about this since early last year, and now it's bubbling. I keep saying this in other shows. It's bubbling to the surface. The things that the three of us have talked about, that I've written about in my books, that you have coming out in your upcoming books, all is beginning to bubble up into the mainstream discussion.
Right. I do remember that we wouldn't even talk about the name of the manufacturer.
That is exactly what
quantum adiabatic computers
Stargate is
back then, because it was real hush hush. But then I see them put in show Continuum right there at their office in Canada, right outside the main office, with it up on the wall, and they're saying this computer here was stolen by time travelers.
It's kind of like, we've been there and done that, because the three of us talked about this back in, I think it was February of last year. Mm-hmm. This computer, the portal, its connection to CERN, the whole issue, we've already laid out in probably at least 100 hours of discussion that we've had on all of this. Now, as you say, it's coming out in the mainstream popular culture.
The quantum computer is tied to CERN. We know the internet was birthed from CERN. And we're talking about the consciousness and how they're doing things to track everyone's thoughts, to push everybody to certain directions, and using the mind, because that's what this is pretty much all about. My research with quantum entanglement, I have compared it to the phallus and the vesica Pisces and the mind of Lucifer and the sun and the moon and merging that and the Antichrist coming. But when I heard you on Gonza's show on Face Like the Sun and you had explained quantum entanglement with God, it just blew me away. Then I talked to Tim. Why don't you explain what you said to me, Tim, and then we'll go more into that.
When we're talking about quantum physics and trying to communicate in spiritual terms, scientific terms, and where do they cross, trying to put it in a format that's understandable, that's where you get caught with trying to, how do you go about saying it? So we work from the premise that Lucifer is a counterfeiter, and he counterfeits the things of God. Therefore, if you look at quantum entanglement, that everything in creation is of God, but then you can have a counterfeit version of that creation of God. I totally understood, and definitely was very spiritually growing for me to understand, and I know that we were going to get into connecting it to the Bible, the concept of the biblical terms of quantum entanglement. Just looking at Lucifer and his builders, his minions, they're into building, they're into using science, they're into using for their own purposes. They have a tendency to mimic God through the mechanical or through the scientific manipulation of already existing forces and things that God already has operating, such as with portals or any of that kind of stuff. God, of course, can open and close space anytime he wants to. They're using technology and machinery to do it. God doesn't need to. Same thing with quantum entanglement. God operates normally in quantum entanglement. And when you start thinking about that, then you'll start going, well, how does that affect me in my Christian life? Quantum entanglement in God. If you want a real revelation, that the Spirit of God is in the Bible, and that each prophet and scribe that wrote with his pen a symbol, which is a letter, that prophet and God, the Holy Spirit, are quantumly entangled and transferring it into a symbol. Now, what do we watch with the Illuminati and their little pyramids? They have symbols galore, don't they? Well,
Sure
our symbols are the words of God transcribed into the Holy Bible. That's a holy inspired book of quantum entangled spirit with God's imprinting on there. Think of it. You read people's books. How many times do you read a book in your lifetime? The Bible, you go to it every day. You see something new every day. It's because it's quantumly entangled with the Spirit of God. You are fellowshipping with the Spirit in the book that's quantumly entangled with God, and he's communicating back to you through his book, quantumly entangling with you. So there's your quantum entanglement connection to the Spirit of God, you as a Christian, and your book, the Holy Inspired Bible.
Beautiful said, my friend.
I was just going to say real quick, Anthony, and then you
Now
can elaborate
imagine-
on that. We'll get
imagine
into
if,
the AI stuff and some other stuff later. But the quantum entanglement is the trickster. The trickster, Satan, wants people to believe the quantum entanglement the Kabbalah way and through different religions. That's what CERN really basically represents, is the quantum entanglement to open a portal to get control through the quantum computer, to control people's minds through the waves and the frequency of false quantum entanglement.
Correct.
Right,
Correct.
that's the way that I see it. But the beautiful way that you explained it, you have a brilliant mind and you see things. God has given you a gift. And I'm not trying to pump you up or buff you up there, but you know what I mean. God has given you a gift and I love it. It's like a light. And just for you to explain that with me researching all this darkness and understanding the way that the occult sees it, it's like a breath of fresh air to see the way that the pure natural truth of God, not the fake truth, not the false light, but the true light and the true creation of God. And so I wanted to ask you, what do you think that quantum entanglement would look like in infinity?
Well, how would you define infinity?
When I think about the quantum entanglement being tangled and entangled and entangled, I see the quantum entanglement on the level that we see it through different dimensions that we can't see and understand. But we also have quantum entanglement that we can understand. We can understand it on our level as humans. And I know that God connects to us on the way that we can understand, and then supernaturally entrust us with many things and show us many things that we can't even explain through this quantum entanglement, through this connection with Him. But God is bigger than what we understand. And so the God that the world is following in this quantum entanglement that is in the quantum computer is not compared to the God that we serve. Because when you said that and I started pondering on it, praying about it, and thinking about it, I started thinking about what is quantum entanglement times infinity. Because God never ends. He is a God that put language into a way that we can understand it. I couldn't fathom the beauty of God and the language of God and the true light of God and His true presence in heaven. And is that's beyond our galaxy, then that's something that we could never understand. But we can understand it on a certain level. So I like that opening of the spirit and the mind, basically not comparing that, because there is no comparison. But like Tim said, Satan does copy God and he wants to be God. So as humans, this is the only way that we can understand what Satan is doing here, by the false Luciferian consciousness copying God through quantum entanglement in order to open a portal. And like you said, it blew me away, a freeway. It's not just a little tiny satanic portal that a wizard opens or anything like that, which can be done all over the world. And there's gates, but this is a freeway that they're going to open.
That's right. And I try to translate things into a form or something that's tangible for people to understand or wrap their heads around, because we can get very deep into the physics or we can get very deep into the spiritual, but it's better to keep it at a tangible level. And so I use words like the freeway. I mean, I'm not Jesus Christ, but I'm somewhat mimicking the way that He taught. He taught in parables. He taught in stories that people could understand and wrap their heads around. His knowledge was so vast and is so vast and so continuous. He could easily, literally blow people's minds, but He took it down to their level. And I think that's what He has, asked me to do, is to try to take what you and Tim and I observe and digest it and place it into a parable, put it in a story format, put it in a phrase like a freeway, so that people can understand the enormity of what we're talking about here when it relates to the portal. Going back to quantum entanglement and infinity, the way that I look at infinity and my relationship with God and with my communication with Jesus Christ is that it's continuous. Infinity is continuous. It's never ending. My link through the Holy Spirit with Jesus Christ is continuous. It never breaks. Therefore, it's infinite. My quantum entanglement is my way of saying this is how, in a physics analogy, how I communicate with Jesus Christ, how we all do. We are in human form and in human relation describing God's creation in the world of physics. And so to describe God's creation of how we communicate spiritually,
I want my individuality
in a
back.
Physics format of quantum entanglement.
I feel like
continues throughout an infinite universe and throughout a continuous form of communication that is unbroken. Therefore, it is infinite in itself. I should define for people who are not familiar with quantum entanglement, to define in the world of physics what
I feel
it is.
like I don't get any individuality.
The behavior of particles, in that if you take one particle,
I got nothing wrong with that. I want my individuality back.
The 3, even 4, including time, the 4-dimensional.
A lot of people want to be somebody, but they don't want to take the credit for it. They don't want to wear the weight of it.
Distance away from us,
it's too heavy.
Particle. And if we affect this particle, if we stimulate it, if we affect that particle in our dimension at a distance, and it doesn't matter the distance, but at a distance, that identical particle simultaneously, there is no speed of light discussion here. We're talking about instantaneous behavior modification. If I modify this particle, another particle at a distance is likewise affected because they are connected through the universe already. There's no time lag to now affect that particle. It happens at the same time. That's a brief description of what quantum entanglement is.
Yeah, I don't want to be quantum
Einstein
entangled.
first postulated it, and he called it spooky action at a distance. He recognized that there was the ability to affect particles at a distance. And we can even talk about the fact that a particle in a different dimension can likewise instantaneously